Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of the Cockpit Counsel webinar. My name's Tim, I'm the host, and today with me I have Brittany Wayne, who I've been fortunate enough have had Brittany join my staff here at LinkSquares. When did you start, Brittany?
Late January, so
Awesome.
a little over
So
2 months.
just long enough to start feeling a little comfortable, which is great.
Yeah.
Um, so we kick this off every week. What's your pre-flight ritual?
So, guess my answer is going to be similar to some of the other guests in making sure my pre-check is on my boarding pass, but that actually expired recently. So I need to make an appointment and go back in to get interviewed by security. So I need to get that back. And then if it's a really long flight, I think I check for my neck pillow
Nice, nice.
if it's a
Yeah,
long flight.
pre-check is so critical that oftentimes can be the difference between making a flight and not making a flight. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So, for everyone listening, let's go through a little bit of your background. Let's talk about your career path a little bit, and what brought you to LinkSquares.
Sure. So, in law school, I knew I've always liked reading and writing and drafting contracts. And in law school, my internships and clerkships and my first job out of law school as an attorney was at high net worth trust and estates firms. I liked, again, drafting and talking to the people, the clients, and helping them plan out their goals and avoiding problems in the future if the documents were well drafted. But
Mhm.
so with high net worth trust and estates, there's a lot of corporate work as well, draft or funneling assets into different LLCs and creating LLCs. And I realized I liked the corporate piece of it more, and so I knew I kind of wanted to get into a more corporate setting. And I also have always just had a big interest in technology and what's being created. And Boston has so many tech companies. So, and I knew a lot of contracts have to go into different tech companies. And so I literally Googled Boston technology law firm. And I just, one day, and I looked at the different results and I reached out to two law firms. And one of them is an outside counsel boutique law firm for technology companies. So I reached out to the founder just to get an informational interview, and that ended up leading to a job. And I loved
That's
it. It was
awesome.
fantastic. Yeah. And so I served as an associate there as outside counsel for technology companies, some that were bigger that had in-house groups that just had extra work outsourced to the firm, and then also some smaller companies that didn't have in-house teams yet. And so that's how I um, realized I really liked in-house work. And from there, I became counsel at a global healthcare consulting company. I was associate counsel and the only counsel. Um, and it was really great. I learned a ton, but I missed the technology piece of it that I had gained some experience in with the outside counsel firm. And that led me here through searching for a CLM, contract lifecycle management software. Actually, that's how I learned about LinkSquares, and we're in Boston, and I just became fascinated with it, and so it led me here.
That's awesome. So let's pause for a minute there. I wanna dig a little bit deeper in. So you're the sole in-house counsel for this organization. Can you talk about my first job out of school, I was the first in-house attorney at an organization as well. I fell completely backwards into it. One day I'll tell you the story on how that happened. But I was super fortunate and had a lot of people help me along the way. But really interested in hearing about your experience as a sole in-house attorney, and what when you first got in, what were the main things you were focusing on, and what were some of the quick wins you had, what were some of the struggles that you dealt with. Really interested in just sort of understanding how you felt there.
Yeah, great question. I'd say I just had to learn so much about the company first. I think that was a big sort of shift in mindset about learning kind of the nitty gritty about the company itself, that I didn't need to learn the different aspects, such granular aspects, when I had multiple companies as clients. So first learning the process of what the company cared about before reviewing the different contracts, I think that was critical, and helped me be more efficient. And I mostly worked on NDAs, master services agreements, and the SOWs, and building relationships with the different sales teams, learning about what those different teams cared about, depending on the type of contract or the type of MSA it was, or because they offered different services, what to look at. I'd say the biggest struggle was dealing with volume. That I had to learn ways to become quicker just through experience, but also just gaining tips and things to do, to become even better.
Yeah.
And but I could
And
see, oh, sorry. I
no,
think
go ahead.
the biggest struggle, and then also being the first in-house counsel, I could tell sales thought of legal as kind of an extra step that maybe wasn't always um, fun or convenient, because but then gaining their trust over time and really like catching now and then things in contracts that really weren't in the company's best interest, or adding something that would help the sales team, like in the SOW or the development team, and showing different teams like what we could add to a contract, and building that trust and no longer being seen as like just an extra step, or um,
Yeah,
was really big.
that's a huge aspect. I know my first job, I was basically hired to help, to help do more or less due diligence for an organization that was undergoing a potential acquisition, and they had a handful of different suitors who were coming through and sending in due diligence request lists, and um, and hurry up and wait sort of thing. We'd produce, and then, oh, that deal fell through. We're talking to these other people, and that deal fell through, and so on and so forth, and go on and on. And so, like the first couple of months that I was there, it was really focused on this, like really focused on this transaction, and like throughout the organization, like I was working with the CFO primarily, and the controller, and the head of FP&A, and really just like the deal team. And other than that, people are like, who's that guy, right? Like, okay, like, oh, finance hire someone new, like you got a new staff accountant or something. Um but when the deal started to sort of slow down, and in those lulls, I got to know a handful of folks throughout the marketing organization. They're like, oh, you're a lawyer, oh, that's cool, that's great, like just like literally passing, like introducing myself to people or whatever. And like, I've got this contract, like, can you take a look at it? I'm like, well, sure. I've never really reviewed a contract before in any meaningful way, but of course I'll look at it and let you know what I think of it. They're like, cool, it's better than like just me doing it. You at least have a legal background. And and that helped me to start to build some of those relationships throughout the organization during the downtime. And then eventually we were able to, 2 years later, end up selling the organization. But one of the things that I struggled with a lot was trying to understand how to get resources to answer questions that, quite frankly, I didn't know the answers to. Interested in hearing from you. You had a couple years under your belt before you were in house, but what did you do when you came across a problem that you just had no idea where to begin?
Yeah. So what I usually try to do is just look online and try to figure it out myself. Like sometimes it'll just be a term that I hadn't even heard before, especially being in the healthcare space. And so I try to familiarize myself just online. But then if I found myself spending too much time where it just was no longer cost efficient, I would then go to the point of contact for the contract. I reported to the CFO as well, like you did, but she really knew everything that was going on with the
Yeah.
company. So during my meetings with her, I'd ask her questions, and luckily everyone at the company was just so receptive and open to being asked questions. So luckily there was that environment where I could ask and learn. But
Yeah.
sometimes, also being in a global space, sometimes the person who I would normally ask the question, being a different time zone, it wasn't always, they weren't always online. So I did have to try to figure things out myself a good amount, and then see how much, maybe skip that part of the contract if I truly couldn't figure it out, and try to get as much other stuff of the contract done before the next morning where I could speak to that person.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh crap, it's 2 o'clock. What time is
Yeah,
it in Lyon right now?
right.
As far as thriving in a fast-paced environment, like we have a pretty fast-paced environment here at LinkSquares, and you know, how are you thinking about prioritizing things? Everything from how am I getting my work done to how am I setting myself up for career progression and personal success throughout the organization.
Yeah, well, I think you already said one of the key elements of thriving, is being able to prioritize effectively. There's always going to be a bunch of things thrown to the legal team at once, and being able to triage with my teammates to make sure we don't duplicate work, but also maybe who's more comfortable handling a certain task. And to bring the most value to the firm, just to try to do things as efficiently as possible. I think communication is so important. Talking to um, either sales or procurement or whoever the contract's coming from, understanding the key elements and timeline of the contract, and also being aware of company policies. Different companies sometimes have a turnaround time frame that they adhere to. So really learning the company itself and the product that we sell, or that a company sells, whatever in-house team you're a part of, I think makes you a better lawyer, for yourself and for the company. And I think that's how to become better and to keep growing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I've tried to emphasize with other in-house attorneys, and particularly folks who are just starting out in their in-house career, is that like you're really your major value at the organization over time is how much of an expert you become in that organization's product, um, that organization's customer, and the way that the organization generally works and how to get things done, right? As I don't know if it was on one of the Cockpit Counsel webinars or if it was a different discussion that I had with Danielle Shear, and Danielle was talking about an exec coach that she had said, well, Danielle, you need to figure out whether you want to be a right or whether you want to be effective. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about the role, is that it's nice when you can be both, but which one's more important, right? Oftentimes being effective is way better than being right. Being right and
I
effective
agree.
gets you brushing up your resume uh, pretty quickly oftentimes. So um, that's definitely a great perspective to take with you as you continue to build your career. What would you say, like from a legal tech perspective, like you were evaluating LinkSquares when you were at your prior company, and a handful of other tools. What problems were you looking to solve, and how, like, what made you turn to, okay, I need to find technology to solve this problem?
Yeah, so when I was brought on, part of one of my goals was to find a way to organize the contracts. And we had a different system, but it wasn't a CLM. It, sort of like a Dropbox, but it didn't, I was able to manually enter in different points of metadata like contract party names, the group within the contract, the company who the contract was about or for, but not that many details about the contract and itself. And so I knew I needed a system where it could pull ideally pull, so I wouldn't have to manually enter it in, key points of each contract in a spreadsheet or something like that. And then, so I knew I needed some sort of repository, but then for me as the attorney, I needed a way to organize what I was actually currently working on too. What I was doing was it was all through email, and then saved on my computer on the cloud, but
Yeah.
every interaction I had regarding a contract was via email with the other party. Sometimes a new email chain would be created, and if I needed to get context on that contract, I'd go through my email history and go through, and it was very tedious and it wasn't efficient, cost efficient, with the amount of time it took just to kind of get the contract done. It took a lot more time by not having these organizational pieces available. So I looked at user friendliness when evaluating different CLMs, which one I thought would be the easiest to use, which one also I thought could scale the easiest. The company where I was, it was growing very fast. And so I knew we already had a lot of contracts, but I knew a whole lot more were going to come, as well as how users could interact with each other. One thing I liked about LinkSquares was the activity feed. And again, it takes so much off email that just, it saves me so much time. So that's something I liked a lot. And with the repository, whether it had the technology or AI to really organize the key point, being able to, for me to, or the CFO, my boss at the time, to be able to run a report saying which contracts are assignable and which aren't. Those are all
Yeah.
different tools I looked at.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible once you start using a system and you're able to use it effectively and use it to combat some of the major problems. Like I think a lot of it is this recognition of what is really the problem. Like Brittany, did you really have trouble actually physically reviewing a contract? No. Like no. It's digging through countless emails to figure out like, oh, so and so sent an email that had something about that contract that now I need to remember what it is, sort of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And to be able to follow up too and see like what hasn't been signed yet, what contracts aren't complete yet, to be able to go into the product and check what's in the queue and the status of that is so much easier than really just keeping track of it on my own.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and so like now sort of being a part of a legal tech company, like when you think about how you spend your day here, like what are some of the things that you've maybe you didn't expect that you would enjoy or you didn't expect that you would be a part of? What are some of the surprises that you've seen that have been either pleasant or negative?
Good question. Well, one thing I knew to expect, but I didn't know what it would be like, would be to be a customer of the product here, while helping the company, negotiating contracts for the company. So I knew I would be doing that when working here, but I didn't really know what it would be like because I had never been part of um, this sort of environment before where I could feel like I could possibly help make the product better.
Right.
So I had never worn that hat before, like thinking, I mean, maybe using different softwares in the past, maybe I'd think to myself like, oh, it'd be great if it had this or something, but I would never go and email that
Right.
product, like you should do this. So that's been really cool, being able to have meetings with product every now and then, and usually it's them telling me new features that I only make, a handful of suggestions, but just being able to feel like I can help make the product better, is a really nice surprise that I wasn't exactly expecting.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things I think about being here is being customer zero, right?
Exactly.
It's a really interesting thing to be a part of. So we got a couple of questions here from the folks that are viewing. Um, what made you decide to go to law school in the first place?
Yeah. So in undergrad, I studied psychology and women's studies, and there wasn't really I knew I wanted to go to grad school, and because there wasn't really a good career path with that background right out of law school, I mean, undergrad. So I had to think about, and I also liked being a student as well. I wanted to go to school again. And so I had to think about where I wanted to go from there, knowing that I liked reading and writing a lot. And I like solving
Did I like
problems.
reading and writing a lot?
Yeah, I did, especially in undergrad. I knew I wasn't going to go into like the science field or yeah. And so I had to think like I could have continued with psychology, but then I I started to just look at all the options. And then with law school, a lot of people think of like just litigation, I think, when they think of lawyers, but there's so many options that come with having a law degree. And I knew I liked solving problems. I've also had a really low tolerance for like unfairness and injustice. And so I didn't know if I wanted to go into the public sector or what. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with the law degree, but I knew I wanted to learn more about the legal system and contracts too, just every part of what law school teaches. And um, I decided to take the jump and do it and gain that skill set.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, for me it was very much the okay, well now what? And I think yeah, it might be cool to be a lawyer. Like looking at some of the documentaries that are out there, like Primal Fear and A Few Good Men, that pretty accurately reflect what all lawyers do. Of course, drew me in immediately. But yeah, learned pretty quickly that's not what life is
Yeah.
like. Last question, because I know we're running up on time here. You're a handful of years into your career and doing just an outstanding job and you're just on a great path. What's some of the best advice that you've received, and what is some advice that you would give to maybe folks coming into their first in-house gig?
Yeah. As cliche as it sounds, I'd have to say, I remember one of the attorneys I worked for one time just emphasized to me how important it is, especially as a young attorney or a law student about to become an attorney, about remembering their worth and believing in themselves, because it can be a really tough industry. And it's easy to start second guessing yourself, but really just believing in yourself. If there's a problem, um, that you will get through it. And I think what comes with that, I'd have to say, trying to find a job that's a good fit. I think a lot of lawyers maybe struggle with that in the beginning, or they make a few changes. And I think it's so important to remember that it's good to say what you when during an interview what you think the other party wants to hear, and if you want to sound good, you want to get the job. But I think it's also really important to ask your own questions, to get a good sense of where you're interviewing, whether it's a company or a law firm, if it would be a good fit for you as well. I think it's easy to forget that, especially in your first few jobs out of law school, just because you want to do whatever it takes, like look good, build that resume.
Yeah.
But it's easy to forget that you kind of need to enjoy where you work too, ideally.
Yeah, exactly. It's a pathway to success, right? Is finding a job that you actually enjoy, and especially if someone pays you for it, like that's awesome, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
and you're more likely to do really well in that position too, if
that's
you are interested in it.
exactly. Yeah, at that point, you're working for you more than you're working for somebody else, which is a great spot to be in. And well, Brittany, thank you so much for taking time. I know directly how very busy you are at this time of March at the end of Q1. So thank you so much for taking a little bit of time and chatting. And as always, it was great. It was great catching up with you. And thanks again.
Yeah, very exciting times. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Brittany.
Bye.